In Part 1 of the Wetland Management Series, we discuss the roles and responsibilities of WRE landowners in managing wetland habitats on their easements. This video will focus on the various wetland types that might occur in your easement and how wetlands change over time due to natural succession. Habitat succession is the natural and predictable transition of one plant community to another over time. It begins with a pioneer plant community that develops when an area is first disturbed and ends with a permanent, mature plant community many years later. In the absence of active management or some type of disturbance, a wetland will naturally transition from moist soil grasses and sedges to emergent marsh, then shrub-scrub woody vegetation, and eventually forested wetlands.
You have to manage the wetland habitat. If you don't, in a very short period of time, Mother Nature will take over. You'll have plants, vegetation that's undesirable, that will literally take over the wildlife spots, the waterfowl holes. If you don't maintain it, I'm talking about on an annual basis. It's a year-round project.
When you look at these properties, if you don't do any management or you do minimum management, you're going to find that succession will take over. If you don't do anything, then you're going to find that the woody vegetation is going to take over in areas that you don't want it to take over. That means your shallow water area, they're going to grow up in woods.
When a wetland reserve easement is established, moist soil wetlands are typically created during the initial restoration phase, which includes the conversion of agricultural fields to shallow water areas or impoundments. Moist soil wetlands provide an abundance of annual seed and invertebrates that benefit waterbirds and other wildlife. When impoundments are seasonally drained and properly managed, they will maintain their early successional moist soil conditions that produce desirable annual plants, such as wild millets, smartweeds, sedges, and panic grasses.
We're here in an impoundment where we just completed a midsummer drawdown. You'll see that we have stretched the duration of this drawdown over about 3 weeks so that we're able to maintain some soil moisture, because the group of plants that we're managing for to be able to attract waterfowl in this impoundment, they exist in the conditions where soil is moist all well into the growing season, so that they can proliferate and produce seed for waterfowl as they migrate in the fall and winter.
Managed moist soil wetlands can also provide open mudflats and shallow water areas that are important for migrating shorebirds and wading birds. When water management and soil disturbance is not performed annually, natural succession will begin transitioning to the next wetland stage, emergent marsh. Emergent marsh is a wetland successional stage that will begin developing relatively quickly in moist soil impoundments with minimal or no disturbance. These areas typically hold water throughout the year, but water levels fluctuate due to rainfall and partial drying in summer. Emergent marsh is characterized by dense wetland plants such as cattails, bulrush, and cutgrass, but will also have some areas of open water. These plants prefer water between 6 inches and 3 feet deep and are rooted in the soil, but emerge above the water surface.
So in an impoundment where you haven't been able to get in and manage in a couple years, over time, some of these perennial species will start popping up. It takes them a couple more years to establish. It also takes a lot longer for you to reclaim those units.
Providing some emergent marsh on your easement increases habitat diversity and provides feeding, roosting, and loafing sites for waterfowl and marsh birds, habitat for reptiles and amphibians, and nesting and brood rearing areas for waterfowl and wading birds. If wetlands are left undisturbed for several years, woody plants begin to invade, and a shrub-scrub community will begin to develop.
When we talk about plant succession in wetland habitats, we're talking about the processes where different habitat types grow into different phases. So for example, we're in a wetland or near a wetland habitat here in impoundment where we have emergent marsh habitat. We have some good quality for waterfowl foods, Delta duck potato that's growing here. It's a good aquatic vegetation. But what's happening is, because this habitat has not been set back, it's not had a disturbance in it in several years. It's starting to grow these woody vegetations. This is buttonbush. It also plays a role in waterfowl habitat because of the structural cover. You can see that it grows up taller than most of the other vegetation around it. Ducks will use this kind of vegetation, especially when it grows together, several plants growing together in a clump. They'll get in late winter, they'll use it for thermal cover. They'll get out of the wind a lot of times to help conserve energy resources. So still has a lot of value, can add some diversity to having this kind of scrub-shrub habitat on an impoundment.
Shrub-scrub communities are recognized by their thick woody vegetation, such as willows and buttonbush, and generally hold between 6 inches and 24 inches of water throughout the growing season. A shrub-scrub community can persist for 20 or more years if adequate water levels are maintained. However, maintaining a high percentage of wetland areas dominated by shrub-scrub communities will limit habitat diversity.
Here we are, we're standing in the bottom end or the lower end, more towards the drainage where this impoundment drains. And as you can see, there's a lot of willow trees, buttonbush, stuff like that. And what I'm trying to achieve here, my goal for this end, is really try to let it get thick and kind of create this scrub-shrub type of habitat. The biggest benefits from the scrub-shrub type of habitat really are pair bonding late in the season. These birds, as soon as they start pairing up, but these are the kind of areas that they like to come to. Another big thing that's really, really good for is also what happens here late in the season. We tend to get a lot of cold weather. When we have that cold weather, thermal regulation is super, super important. The birds being able to get down in here, keep that wind off of them and stay warm on those really, really cold days is a huge, huge benefit. Along with the thermal regulation and kind of pair bonding isolation in this type of habitat, we have really, really great invertebrate hatches. So, that's another good thing. A lot of times people think, they're just loafing in here, but they're still in here eating bugs. A lot of times when that pair bonding is going on, those hens are a lot of times looking for those invertebrates because they're starting to try to, they really, really need that calcium for getting their eggs, their shells and all that ready to go for nesting. So this is kind of the areas that they kind of really start looking for that.
Over time, shrub-scrub habitats may have voluntary tree species begin to establish as they start transitioning to the next successional stage, forested wetlands. However, on most wetland reserve easements, forested wetlands are designated and restored through planting appropriate tree species. Tree species planted on easements are generally matched to site conditions based on their flood tolerance. Cypress and tupelo work best on wetter sites, while willow oak, ash, bitter pecan, and similar trees do better on higher ground. Forested wetlands are typically subject to flooding from river overflow or excessive rainfall. The level and frequency of flooding, along with the flood tolerance of different species, will determine which trees survive and develop. Forested wetlands are ideal for providing hard mast, such as acorns and pecans, for many species of wildlife, as well as cover and roosting sites for water birds and other species. For more information on assistance with wetland reserve easements, or to obtain compatible use authorizations, contact your local USDA Service Center. Wetland reserve management videos were developed by NRCS and the Tri-State Conservation Partnership.